I'll just wait till the first slide comes up. So, Yapalingana everybody. Mina Maggie Walter, Mina Briggs Palawa Lutruwita, Wisi Warranta, Kani Mapli, Milathina, Mina Tanapri Palawa, Muhanina, Nigimpi, Nangampi, Takana. Makuminya, Milathina, Nikea, Tanapri, Nigimpi, Nangampi, Mana Mapli. So hello, I'm Maggie Walter. I'm Palawa, I'm a member of the Briggs Tasmanian Aboriginal family, which is one of the three main families. If you want to know why there's only three, ask me later. And I'm acknowledged that I'm speaking tonight here on Aboriginal land, which is the traditional lands of the Muhanina, and more broadly, I acknowledge the Palawa peoples and the owners of our seaways, waterways and skyways, and I welcome you here to our talk tonight. Keep it up a little bit? Okay, I've been told. Okay, I'll move across a little bit so it's easier for me to see. So now Finn's going to be doing all this. So this is to introduce myself. Up, thank you. So I'm like just about all Aboriginal Tasmanians, my traditional country is the far northeast. If you want to know why, nearly everybody in Tasmania comes from the far northeast. Again, ask me later in the bar, I'll tell you. I'm a direct descendant of Manalagena, the cool-looking dude at the top. It's my great-grandmother, Dalrymple Gower Anderson there, and that's my dad, Cease, on the bottom. Yeah. So let's talk data. Let's talk population statistics. What are they good for? This is what the census tells us. They provide account of populations, they record key population characteristics, they provide data on the Australian way of life, and they help governments plan for the future. And that's what you're all doing this coming week as you're filling out your census form. We filled ours out last week. We said we'd be in Melbourne on Tuesday. We're not. But the thing is, how do these translate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and for people here, Palawa people here in Lutruwita particularly? What we've got to think about is, what are data for? What are their purpose? Why does the nation state gather data? It's not just sort of, general counting. It is for account, but it's for much, much more. And we all know, well, we should know, that Aboriginal people were specifically excluded from the census right up until 1971. So it wasn't until after the 1967 referendum that the federal government was allowed to change the rules and have Aboriginal people actually counted. So it's a way the state makes sense of its populations. It's how they see those populations. So they can plan, they can do all those things, and they can understand what Australia is. So what they reflect is what is important to the state, because not everything is collected. So when they're looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander statistics, and I use the term Indigenous because Indigenous data sovereignty is a global movement, it's about what the state finds interesting or important to know about its Indigenous populations. And it's very much shaped by the narrative of how non-Indigenous Australia knows Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia. So that's what shapes what they collect. And really, it doesn't reflect Indigenous life in any way. It doesn't reflect our embedded realities. It doesn't serve our purposes. So what are they good for? At the moment, not much. Okay, let's go. Yep. So we've got an Indigenous data paradox, and this is true here in Australia, here in Tasmania, in New Zealand, in Canada, in the US, and everywhere else, whether in Sweden, in Norway. And what it is we've got too much data and too little. So let's have a look. So the first lot is the too much. We've got a whole lot of data that's blameworthy, which is presented as a way really of making the idea that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are complicit in our own dire disadvantage. So you might say, okay, this is a thing about alcohol. Is it true? Possibly, the numbers add up. But this graph didn't make itself. Somebody made it. Somebody decided that this was the most important thing to know about the Aboriginal population in comparison to the non-Aboriginal, and stuck it in the middle of the page of the report. Next one. It's aggregate. It's always national. It's occasionally state. But this is what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia looks like. useless. So when they put something in national, they're mashing together all the data from the people from Cape York, from Broome, from South Australia, from Shepparton and Tasmania, and that's what they present. I don't see how that makes any sense. It certainly doesn't from an analytical point of view. It's just presenting a picture which is basically useless if you want to use it for any policy, which might explain why we have 200 years of failed policy. It's decontextualised. It's always what. We never get to why. So this is smoking rates. Yep, okay, Aboriginal people smoke more. Why? That's the interesting question. Not asked, not answered by the data at least. Yep. It's always in the deficit model. It's always about the problems, and in its focus, it focuses in on the problem of the individual Aboriginal person, the family or the community. Yep. So this is incarceration rates. Why would you just put that up? Why? You can see this all the time and not go, why? How can you explain this? It is really just reductive. So it's always comparing Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. So you can't make sense of Indigenous data unless you compare it with non-Indigenous data, as if you have to compare us to normal people. It is always in the deficit. So this is the too little. So, yep. We have almost nothing that reflects the broader picture of our Indigenous life world, of what we want to know, our cultures, communities and our life worlds. We want data that's disaggregated, that we can actually use. Data that's reflective of what's happening here in Hobart for Palawa people. We want something that measures beyond the problems and addresses our priorities and agendas. We want to contribute to nation rebuilding. And we need, how can you offer community level programs and things if you have no data to plan those around? And we want data that's accountable to those to whom it relates. Now, to give you, I think I'll stop there, to give you a real life example, this last Thursday, the first of the new Closing the Gap reports came out. So the old Closing the Gap had 6 targets, went for 10 years, dismal failure. The new Closing the Gap has got 18 targets, and it is sort of an agreement between the Coalition of the Peaks, so it now is supposed to be about power sharing around how we change and actually close that gap. But the first report out, not only does it show that most targets still aren't being met, but there's no data to answer or a whole lot of them. So before we can actually see if the targets are being met, data collection is going to have to get started. And they're always on the things that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people wanted included in those Closing the Gaps. That's what we've got no data for. So we need the data. So just have a little look around Palawa, because I might be wrong, and some of you will prove me wrong when we chat later, but I would say that most people here know almost nothing about the Palawa people of Tasmania. You know we're here, but what do we look like socio-economically and demographically, let alone culturally? So this is where we live. So we're not evenly spread throughout the population, throughout the place. Why are we bunched up in these places? Well, my family comes up there from the northwest. I've got thousands of relatives living up there still. So the 3 families mostly still live in the areas where the matriarchs settled. So that's on the islands, coming into Launceston, it's around the southeastern Hobart, around Cygnet, etc., and it's up Latrobe, Burnie, Ulverston in the northwest. That's where we live, and it shows in the stats. We're also, this is the deficit data. Now I have to show you this because I don't have any other data to show you. So this is the data that are collected. So this is from the 2016 census, so they're getting a little bit out of date much, but we won't expect that the 21 will show much difference. So you can see, I think the most interesting thing on here for me is not how much poorer, how much more crowded, etc. we are, but the median age. So 23 is the median age of Aboriginal people here in Tasmania, compared to 42 for the non-Aboriginal population. So despite living among and all through the same cultural and social milieus, our population is very different, have a very young population. I think around 40% are 15 and younger. Very different. And in that way, we look like the rest of Aboriginal Australia. We don't look like non-Aboriginal Tasmania. You can read the others yourself. Okay, again, we're not very well educated. Only 5.5% of us hold a bachelor degree or above. Again, Year 12, starting to catch up, but I always get grumpy about this one because Year 12 is not Year 12. How many get an ATAR? That's the big thing, not complete Year 12. And again, this is that demographic pattern. Yeah, 33% of us at the 2016 were under 15. Next. Okay, so this is something from the Productivity Commission, Overcoming Indigenous Disadvantage. Even the title makes you want to sigh, doesn't it? Really? Come on, guys. All right, this is the ATAR. So this is just compared with other, and look, they are trying. I have been growling at Productivity Commission for years, and they've finally stopped just instantly putting the non-Indigenous down the side. So, step forward. But you can see that our ATAR rate, only 34%, and you can see that the psychological stress in the population is as high here as it is everywhere else. Yeah. But mostly when you look at the Productivity Commission report, what you see is, not mostly, but there's a whole lot of it that looks like this, that they can't analyse it, they can't show us because the data just aren't there. And that is especially egregious here in Tasmania. Health data, completely unreliable. Birth, deaths and marriage data, completely unreliable. And I would bet a whole lot of the other data. The only data that's good, and I might be being too suspicious here, the only data that's good is the education data. Want to know why? You get paid from the Commonwealth based on your kids in grade 12 and university, etc., etc. So if there's an incentive, the data will be collected. Okay, Indigenous data sovereignty. What is it? It is the right of Indigenous peoples to govern the collection, management, access, interpretation, dissemination and reuse of the data related to them. It's about rights. It's not about consultation or being on an advisory group. It is about our rights, and it relates to all data about Indigenous peoples, about country and resources. It's not just population data, it's everything. It reaffirms our understanding that knowledge belongs to the collective. It is not something that can be individually owned. Can't be given away. It's premised on accountability, and it does really relate to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it demands that data reflects our aspirations, our agendas, and that be used to enhance Indigenous collective wellbeing according to us. We define what is collective wellbeing, because we've had it defined for us an awful lot. Okay. So there's two sides of it. So there's data for governance and governance for data. So this is the two sides, the too much data and the too little data, again. So we need that governance of data, which governance by here I mean decision making. We need to be making the decisions, not being consulted. We've had 40 years of consultation. I can't see any results, can you? Got to refute that 5D data of disregard, we've got to tell our own stories, and we've got to be able to apply Indigenous data protocols. And we are making quite considerable moves here as well. Things are happening. And for the data for governance, we need governance for our own, for our self-determination. We need to inform program and policy delivery. We need to be developing our own infrastructure, including data infrastructure. And we need to be able to develop and define our own indicators and measures, not how much we drink, how low birth weight the babies are. So Indigenous data governance is the mechanism by which we deliver Indigenous data sovereignty. So we did have a summit back in 2018 where we brought 50 Indigenous leaders from across the country in Canberra, and this is the set of protocols that we came up with. We're having a meeting again later this year to refine these further and mix with our international colleagues, but they're not a bad start. So this is what everybody came up with. I'll let you read those for yourself. You don't need me to read them for you. And I think you agree as you read them, it's not an unreasonable ask. Yet these things have not been within our purview at all since 1971 and before, because of course we were counted, we just weren't counted officially. Okay, that's the end of my talk. I hope I'm on time. If you want to find out more, there's the Myamnari Wingara website, that's the Australian Indigenous Data Collective, of which I'm part, and the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, of which Myamnari Wingara is on the executive. And we have 2 books there. So we've got Indigenous Data Sovereignty by Tahu Kukatai and John Taylor. That's available free.